according to Mueller's timeline, Assange announced that he had the emails before he even made contact with the Russian operative who gave Assange the emails. It makes no sense. And then we have the admission from CrowdStrike, the firm that generated the Russian hacking allegation, admitted under oath in December 2017. They have no evidence that these alleged Russian hackers actually exfiltrated anything from the server. That was kept under wraps for the entirety of the Mueller investigation. Only came out in May 2020. Mueller also admits in the Mueller report that he doesn't rule out that WikiLeaks might have gotten data from intermediaries in the summer of 2016, which means he doesn't actually know how WikiLeaks got the emails.
Aaron Maté, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thank you very much for being back on. It's been about 2 years, I think, since we last spoke. And I'm not sure if you recall the last time you were on, I had both you and Matt Taibbi on. I really enjoyed the episode a lot. I thought it was good to kind of get both of your perspectives. But one of the first questions that I asked you both on that show was in regards to TYT. And I don't know if you recall, but at the time we were kind of discussing how progressive left-wing media had embraced RussiaGate. And in response to the question, you talked about Democracy Now! A bit, but didn't really talk about TYT. Obviously, this spring, we saw a big feud blow up between you and Jimmy Dore with TYT. And I guess I was just wondering, for some kind of background perspective, how did that come about? What has been the relationship between you and TYT, and just, how did this turn into a feud?
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time talking about TYT, only because I think I've talked about them enough. I've made fun of them enough. And I think they don't have much significance anymore beyond just showing what a self-parody, sometimes self-identified progressive media can be. I think they're a good illustration of that. But in terms of how this came about, I haven't had much of a relationship with them. It's funny. It's like, because during RussiaGate, like on Twitter and stuff, I would sometimes, if they put out some really dumb segment on RussiaGate, I would make fun of it. I'd make some kind of joke. Like, I remember one time they had some segment about how like Russia hacked all 50 states, because this like story that like Russia was tampering with voting machines across the country. Again, like everything else with RussiaGate, complete disinformation. So I think I tweeted something like, RussiaGate hacked all of TYT's brains in response. So I would do stuff like that. But at the same time, one of the things I gave credit to Cenk for at the time is that even though, he totally drank the Kool-Aid, he embarrassed himself by being such a RussiaGate dupe, he at least had on people who had a contrary point of view. For a time, Michael Tracy and Jordan Cheriton were working for him. So was Jimmy Dore. And these guys were all debunking the propaganda that Cenk was falling for and promoting himself. So I thought at least he deserved credit for that. And, in terms of me personally, he even brought me on once. I was in LA and they brought me on, and Cenk and I had a civil exchange. And this was this would have been in early 2019, so right before RussiaGate completely collapsed with the Mueller report. So I at least thought of Cenk as someone who's like, even though I thought he was a dupe, at least he was someone who was open to dissenting opinions. And, look, when he ran for Congress, I even donated to his campaign because he was for Medicare for all. And I thought, even though he's a chump, at least he's open-minded on things like RussiaGate. And look, and even before, if you go back and look at his old clips, there's times when he's sometimes skeptical of the warmongering claims on Syria that he now promotes. Like, there was a time when he was like voicing skepticism somewhat of these allegations of chemical weapons attacks in Syria, the same thing that he's now totally on board for and trashing me for reporting on based on internal leaks from the OPCW, which is really funny. But so that was the extent of our history. I didn't have much interaction with them. Also, Katie Halper, like my friend Katie Halper, she used to freelance for them, and she interviewed me once about RussiaGate. And, so it's like, I just thought of them as being dupes, but at least people with their heart in the right place. Like, that was kind of my thought of them. They just didn't know any better. Mm-hmm. But this whole Jimmy Dore Syria thing where they attacked me, that just showed them to be a lot more cynical and just mendacious than I realized before.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a clip of Cenk specifically defending Jimmy Dore from being called a conspiracy theorist by CNN because of what he was saying about Syria.
But at the end, they're mainstream media, so they have to do false equivalency. So we have the monsters on the right. Oh, we don't have anybody on the left because nobody on the left is doing anything anywhere that bad. So at their last paragraph before they get to listing all the sponsors is ads also appeared on the Jimmy Dore channel, a far left YouTube channel that peddles conspiracy theories, such as the idea that Syrian chemical weapons attacks are hoaxes. What? Why did you just put him in a league with Nazis, you monsters? No, that's not what Jimmy Dore's channel does. Jimmy Dore's channel fights for Medicare for all, the $15 minimum wage, and the list goes on and on. And you know what? 60% of the country agrees with those policies. So you're actually attacking a majority of Americans. What they're referring to about the Syrian chemical attacks, Rand Paul went on television, said almost the same exact thing Jimmy did, which is don't just trust the Pentagon. Let's verify to see if that attack actually came from the sources that the Pentagon says that it came from. That's what any responsible citizen should do. By the way, that's what a journalist should do. But CNN, on the other hand, goes, the Pentagon said it, so it must be true. I took down the note from the spokesman from the Pentagon. That's why CNN needs to partner with people like PolitiFact to check facts for them, because they're not real journalists. If you were a real journalist, you would actually have your own organization to check facts, and you would have checked the fact about Jimmy Dore, which you didn't. Instead, you did false equivalency. It's another reason why this article is absolutely trash.
And I think a lot of folks have kind of suspected that the $20 million investment into TYT in 2017 that was headlined by Jeffrey Katzenberg, but others, that may have influenced TYT. And Robbie Yeager covered that extensively, suggesting that money really did change TYT's perspective. I'm just wondering if you think that's the case as well. Do you think that this money did kind of influence how Cenk and TYT report the news?
Knowing now what a liar Cenk is, and knowing just how craven he is and how he doesn't really follow any real standards of journalism, do I think possibly he was influenced by $20 million from Jeffrey Katzenberg? Yes, I think it's totally fair to speculate. You know, I can't show what's in the guy's heart, and it doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is what they say and whether it's true or not. And they've lied so many times about Jimmy Dore, especially. I mean, the way they treated him was just ridiculous. And they've shown themselves to be such dupes politically. I just like to make fun of their ideas, their expressed views. And yes, but do I think, is it fair to speculate that they were corrupted by taking 20 million from Jeffrey Katzenberg, going from being the young Turks to the young Katzenbergs, or the middle-aged McCarthyites, as I like to call them? Yes, I think it's a totally fair thing to speculate.
And just so you know, too, I've actually offered to donate $5,000 to any charity of Cenk's choice for him to come on this show and kind of clear the air.
Primo Radical says, I'll make a $5,000 donation if you sit down with me for an hour-long interview about how Jeffrey Katzenberg's money has influenced TYT reporting. Namely on foreign policy, but also issues like criminalization of homeless in Los Angeles. We all saw that shit. We saw that shit.
You know, I would think that if this money did not influence him, that he should, talk about it and kind of prove why these claims are false. But I guess I'm also interested in what your thoughts are on a broader scale, not specifically because of TYT, because again, last time that you were on, we talked about how Democracy Now! Had changed a bit. And we've really seen this across the board with many different outlets and individuals as well. I mean, you've seen it with Sam Cedar. I personally reported how the Green Party, in addition to some of the strange things that were happening in their nomination, Howie Hawkins, their nominee, who really was their coronated nominee, he embraced RussiaGate and also anti-Syria talking points as well. Yeah. I also covered the misrepresentation of Mike Gravel during his campaign. A tweet that was put out that he disagreed with was about Syria and about Trump trying to remove troops there. We've seen this with Vosh a lot. He's been going after folks like you and Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald, and backing all these imperialist talking points, saying how China and Russia are these right-wing threats to global democracy. So I guess I'm just wondering, overall, what do you think has really inspired this trend? Do you think that it's just honest differences of opinion? Is it a class issue? Is it money? Is it the CIA? Like, what do you think is causing this massive rift within the left?
You know, it's hard to make broad generalizations because I don't know what's going on with every single individual person. And some people I just don't even pay attention to. Like, why should I care what Bosch says? You know, like, why is that even a thing? I don't understand. Like, he's a guy who sits in front of his computer and he has a deep voice. That's what I understand about Bosch. But like, you know, I don't understand what significance he has, what audience he has, or, you know, why he's even someone who, you know, I need to respond to. But, you know, the places I care about, you know, which does have a history of being, in my opinion, I'm biased because I was a part of it, but I think it has a very noble history. I was very inspired by DN before I started working there. And then when I was there, I learned so much about journalism and just what a sacred space DN was to be able to, I think, do genuine adversarial journalism, hold everyone to account. That doesn't mean everything DN did was perfect, and we had our blind spots that I can especially see now looking back. But I think,
I'm sorry, what were those blind spots at Democracy?
Well, if you go back, you look at our coverage. So I was there for 10 years. So I spanned the end of the Bush administration to, I was there from late 2005 to 2016. And so during my time there, I can look back and say on Libya, in the overall Arab Spring, we were naive. And if you look back at some of the coverage of Libya, it was basically pro-rebel. And during my time there, I started realizing that, and I tried to correct it. Like I would do stuff that would be my attempt to sort of tacitly correct the stuff we got wrong on Libya. But, you know, part of that is just, you know, so it's like, I don't fault places like DN for getting things wrong because, you know, like I've gotten things wrong. I was there when we got Libya wrong. But it's what's going on with DN is interesting because they've obviously made a clear editorial choice to get it wrong and to not, even when, you know, they get presented with like countervailing facts and they get requests to have on a different point of view, like say on Syria, they just haven't done it. On Syria, they've completely adopted a pro-dirty war line, basically. And so I think what's going on there is, I think you can extend this to other places too. We have a very powerful propaganda system in the US. It's very, very sophisticated. And it works beautifully because there's no one to tell you exactly what to say. But basically, you know, the red lines get drawn. And the message is basically imparted that, you know, if you cross this red line, then you're too far gone. You're, in the case of Syria, you're an apologist for a dictatorship, you're denying chemical weapons attacks. And the intimidation that this causes of like fear of being called a bad name, like an Assadist or whatever it is, I think that works on people. And I think also just when it comes to Syria, for example, there's been so much effort spent on propaganda for that dirty war, which makes sense because this is one of the most expensive dirty wars on history. So of course that's going to come with a really sophisticated propaganda campaign. And in the case of a place like Democracy Now!, I think whoever is in charge of making decisions there, editorial decisions there right now, because it's not everyone there who has this line, but in terms of the people who've been able to, you know, drive the editorial line on something like Syria, they've completely just been duped by propaganda. I don't think it's financial corruption. I don't think it's them being co-opted by the CIA. I know people speculate that, but I just don't think it works like that. I'm sure there are examples of that at some places, but speaking as someone who worked at Democracy Now! For 10 years, I don't think it's something, you know, as nefarious as that. It's more just like the power of our propaganda system and how easily people subconsciously get corrupted by it. They see the incentives of drinking the Kool-Aid, of towing the party line. And whether it's a conscious decision or not, at some level, they internalize this acceptance of propaganda, and they just don't allow themselves to process the thoughts that challenge it and process the information that challenges it. And it's weird because to me, a place like Democracy Now! Used to embody the willingness to be brave and to challenge propaganda, especially on War and Peace. That was our whole thing. But I just, you know, in terms of why, that's the kind of analysis I have to explain it.
Well, you know, a recent guest that I had on, Caleb Maupin, he kind of drew connections between some of the different groups and individuals I spoke with and DSA and Jacobin. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on DSA and Jacobin. Do you think that they represent anti-imperialism to any extent, or have they really gone the TYT route?
You look at Jacobin, there's so much to criticize. I mean, look, they still host Anna Kasparian as like a host on one of their shows, which I think says it all about their commitment to genuine anti-imperialism. I mean, if you were genuinely committed to anti-imperialism, I don't think you would let someone who's like a staunch cheerleader for imperialism in Syria to host one of your shows. But I mean, whatever. And you know, and there, you know, people, there's all sorts of things that they publish that people have criticized, and I think accurately. But at the same time, I read stuff in Jacobin that I really like, and so you know, I don't really like whether they're sufficiently anti-imperialist or not. I mean, I just prefer to judge people on, are they publishing factual information? I think Jacobin, in a lot of cases, has gotten it wrong. Like when it comes to Syria, when it comes to targets of regime change in Latin America, but they've also published stuff that I think gets it right. So I don't want to make any sort of broad generalizations about, you know, who they are at their essence. I just, you know, think it's important when you see stuff that's false and that's propaganda, you should call it out. You know, a place like, you know, a place where there's really almost nothing good on foreign policy, or at least on the foreign policy issues where courage is required, is The Intercept. The Intercept is a place where there's an obvious editorial line that is completely susceptible to you know, neocon propaganda. I mean, you look at all the areas of the world where it requires some courage and some sophistication to be able to come up with a proper analysis, and The Intercept repeatedly lacks it. You look at, you know, RussiaGate. They were basically embarrassed by Glenn Greenwald getting it right. I mean, that was basically the editorial line. Like, Betsy Reed, the editor-in-chief, had to kind of apologize for Glenn's existence, even though he was the only person getting it right, and thus giving them credibility on RussiaGate. And they even brought on Jim Risen of the New York Times to like cater to liberal audiences and to write RussiaGate fan fiction and pay him something like $300,000 to come up with some of the most laughable stuff of all of RussiaGate. And you look at the Syria dirty war, they were like Democracy Now!, also pro-dirty war on Syria. And sometimes they let someone voice some kind of dissent, but that, you know, if someone like Mehdi Hassan would do it in a way that like accepts all the pro-war talking points anyway. So it's like, even if he thinks he's criticizing the dirty war in Syria, he's not really anyway, because he's still accepting so much of the underlying propaganda that was used to wage it. So yeah, The Intercept sucks on foreign policy, I think, and on any issue that requires genuine adversarial journalism with genuine courage, where there's going to be consequences for not towing the line. It's easy now to be good on Palestine, and that's great because our culture has evolved. But on places like Syria, where, you know, you're going to be called bad names if you actually speak the truth, they've been completely cowardly. And so that's a place where I think you can apply a broad criticism to. I think a place like Jacobin, it strikes me as a bit more nuanced.
Well, one division that I am seeing in the anti-imperialist left is over COVID and the vaccine and the prospect of vaccine passports. And, you know, it's just, it's become a little strange where, you know, you're hearing kind of different takes from folks like Max Blumenthal versus Katie Halper, folks who, you know, typically agree on almost everything. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this. Do you think that this is something really significant that is going to divide the anti-imperialist left? Is it just a kind of, are they nuanced differences and that there are large areas of agreement, or just what's your general thoughts on this?
I don't think it's going to divide the anti-imperialist left. Look, you take someone like Max, what are his top concerns? He's worried about mandates hurting workers. You know, he talks about bus drivers in Chicago losing their jobs en masse and then being replaced by Uber drivers, and you know, and healthcare workers in New York State being, you know, losing their jobs. I think those are fair concerns. I don't, you know, for people who criticize vaccines, see, to me, it's fair to question the agenda of Big Pharma. And obviously, Big Pharma does have a questionable agenda, and one that we should criticize. I mean, my thing is I don't want to play into any agenda that is going to deny vaccines to the parts of the world that want them. And to me, the problem with big pharma and vaccines, like the main one for me, is that it's conspiring to deny vaccines and the vaccine technology to the global South states that want them. So everyone's got their own opinion on this. I certainly think everything should be debated, and to whatever extent there's censorship or shutting down debate, I think that's a bad thing. But that's where I come from. I personally trust the vaccine. I think that it's people's individual choice to make, though, whether they should want to take it. And if they don't want to take it, I don't believe in shaming people and being condescending. But I also am, I just don't want to. I'm worried about sometimes skepticism going what I see as too far. But it's not something I've studied too in depth. And when I've tweeted stuff in support of the global South getting vaccines, I see a lot of people out there don't agree, and I don't agree with them. But whatever, I think it's okay to have disagreements.
Well, just on that subject, just for clarification, because I think that there are certain countries who are saying that they don't want it, right? Or at least their governments are. Is that the case, or are we really withholding vaccines from those countries? Absolutely.
The big pharma companies are preventing the technology from going to global South countries that want it. And the US, via its sanctions on Cuba, has made it a lot harder for Cuba to administer its own vaccine, because in Cuba there was a shortage of some key supplies that I think you can rightly blame on the US embargo. So I don't think there's any question that big pharma is withholding vaccine technology from global South countries. I mean, Moderna just recently got called out for that. I mean, that's especially an issue with them. So I don't think that's up for debate.
Okay. But domestically, as far as, keeping people from having jobs if they're not vaccinated, or, attending events or whatnot, do you think that that's the right call?
Well, so take the example of bus drivers in Chicago. There's got to be some other way. See, I don't believe in, I don't know enough about the virus itself to say that it's okay for unvaccinated people to go to work and to drive around children, because then you're possibly putting these children at risk. What I do know is if they can prove that they have antibodies, then I think that should suffice to let them go back to work. But if they don't have the antibodies and they won't get vaccinated, then I at least think there's got to be some other way to provide people with their livelihoods than just firing them. I don't believe in firing people, especially, we're talking about an African-American population that has, historical reasons to be skeptical of vaccines. And I think you just have to be sensitive to that. And it is true that this is a relatively new thing. So people have concerns that it's not accurately been tested yet. Again, I personally trust the vaccine science from what I've read of it, but I also want to respect people's right to go at their own pace. So I think you have to take it case by case. I also think, for people who oppose vaccine mandates completely, you have to make the argument then that the unvaccinated person working poses no risk to the people around them. And I don't think there's enough science yet that can justify that position.
I did just want to ask you one political question, because something about the Democrats' political calculus that really surprises me and confuses me is in regard to some of the austerity that we've been seeing, or that we're kind of rolling into. So we saw this with the end of the eviction moratoriums, the end of the added unemployment benefits. We haven't been getting any more stimulus money. In February, student loan payments are set to resume, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's going to stop that at this point. And it seems odd to me that you would have rollback of all these different COVID initiatives also going hand in hand with the requirement for vaccination going into next year. It just seems like really bad political calculus for the Democrats, and it's really going to hurt them. Do you have any thoughts on why they might be doing this or going along with this?
Why they're rolling back social safety net programs right now?
Going into the 2022 election.
Well, look, it's a party beholden to Wall Street for the most part. So I think that's probably a driving factor. I mean, now, a Democrat would say that they are trying to push through the Build Back Better agenda, which is a expansion of the social safety net. And it is right now really only two people in the Senate stopping that. It's Manchin and Sinema. So perhaps they're putting their hopes on this Build Back Better agenda being sufficient if it can pass to meet people's needs. But yeah, I mean, obviously Democrats are traditionally, not a progressive party. So it's not surprising. I mean, whether there's electoral cost or not, so it's not surprising that they would not be fighting harder to keep the eviction moratoriums and other benefits for people.
Well, Aaron, I did have some patron questions if you have a little time left.
Yeah.
So the first one is in regards to the Kurds and the Uyghurs. I guess the patron is just wondering if you believe that there are any kind of ethnic cleansing or repression going on against either of those groups.
Repression, absolutely. I mean, Kurds are just historically repressed, and I'm not sure where this question is referring to, because Kurds are in many countries, Turkey, Iraq, Syria. But yeah, sure. Of course, there's been repression of the Kurds, and I'm sure. Look, the thing is, it's hard to weigh in on Xinjiang because I've never been there, and but do I think that or do I find it plausible that there's repression going on? Absolutely. It sounds like basically China waged its own version of the war on terror. China suffered a lot of terrorist attacks from separatists in Xinjiang and has launched this aggressive campaign to try to curb out extremism. And now they did it, I think, in a far less extreme way than the US did, by launching wars all around the world, committing torture and all the horrible things that the US has done. But do I think it's plausible that there's repression? Yes. Chaz Freeman, who was a former senior US diplomat, who was Nixon's translator when he went to China, he says that there's repression there. And, I trust him as a China expert. So, yeah, I mean, if he says it, I don't think he'd say it if there wasn't some evidence for it.
Do you believe that they should have their own nation states?
I believe that's for, China to work out itself. What I do know is that the US has zero business supporting separatist movements. And the only reason we're hearing claims about a genocide in Xinjiang is because the US is trying to use the separatist movement there to basically destabilize China. It's the same playbook it follows pretty much everywhere. And there's been, just like with Syria, a really sophisticated propaganda campaign rolled out to convince people that there's this genocide going on. And it's just amazing, again, how many independent progressive journalists, people who get it, so many things right, have been duped by this campaign too. I mean, think about it. If there was really a genocide going on right now, don't you think we'd be doing more than just sending tweets? And don't you think there'd be some kind of evidence for it? Some kind of evidence for like mass torture and mass internment and all these things we keep hearing about. But people, because they've internalized the propaganda system of US empire so much, they just feel so casually able to declare that there's a genocide going on in China. And the reason is because the accusation is made against the enemy state. So once a state is deemed to be an official enemy of the US government, you can say whatever you want. It's kind of like Russian interference. I mean, people just casually say the term Russian interference or the Russians as if there's some genuine meaning to that, when really it's a propaganda term. And they would never say something like Israeli interference or the Israelis. But because the Russians have been painted to be this like cartoonish villain, able to brainwash millions of Americans with their Facebook ads and social media memes, people just subconsciously accept the propaganda at face value. And that's what I'm trying to, that's my concern when it comes to Xinjiang, is challenging the US propaganda. And, I just refer people to all the great work that the Gray Zone has done on this. Like there's no denying that China has a internally repressive system. There's a mass surveillance of their population. And I'm sure that there's repression in Xinjiang, but it's amazing to me how easily people feel able to make sweeping judgments about places that they've never been, where the only sources are shady sources like Adrian Zenz, who is like a documented bigot, evangelical Christian. He single-handedly has become the basis for so many of the claims that, you know, Western journalists rely on, including progressive journalists. Adrian Zenz, who is this far-right evangelical bigot, works for the Victims of Communism Foundation. He was a guest on Democracy Now!, treated as a serious person. Ryan Grimm the other day of The Intercept shared an article based on his fake research. And again, pretty much the leading place in the US that has debunked all this is the Gray Zone. All of Adrian Zenz's stuff has been debunked by the Gray Zone. And his background, his crazy views about, you know, he feels on a mission. He feels sent. He's literally said that he feels sent by God to take on China. And he talked about, you know, he wrote a book about his evangelical beliefs about, you know, Jews are going to burn hell and all this crazy stuff like that. This guy gets to be treated as a serious expert, including by progressives. Again, going back to Syria, it just speaks to the absolute power of our propaganda system here in the US.
Next patron, Nick, wanted to know if you ever studied the findings of Ray McGovern and Bill Binney regarding the supposed DNC hack, which they characterized as a leak.
Yeah, I did. I think if I had to bet, I bet they're right. I think it was a leak based on everything that we know. I mean, I don't have to go through all the details, but you have a Mueller report that is basically incoherent. Mueller's timeline makes no sense. So Julian Assange, I think June 12th, I think he announces that WikiLeaks has leaks coming up about Hillary Clinton. So he previews the DNC emails. It's only after then that Mueller says that Assange makes his first contact with Guccifer 2.0. And Guccifer 2.0 is a supposed Russian intelligence cutout who Mueller suggests, doesn't even state outright because he doesn't have the evidence, but he suggests that Guccifer 2.0 gave Assange the emails. So according to Mueller's timeline, Assange announced that he had the emails before he even made contact with the Russian operative who gave Assange the emails. It makes no sense. And then we have the admission from CrowdStrike, the firm that generated the Russian hacking allegation, admitted under oath in December 2017. They have no evidence that these alleged Russian hackers actually exfiltrated anything from the server. That was kept under wraps for the entirety of the Mueller investigation, only came out in May 2020. And there's other evidence too that just shows the complete lack of, Mueller also admits in the Mueller report that he doesn't rule out that WikiLeaks might have gotten data from intermediaries in the summer of 2016, which means he doesn't actually know how WikiLeaks got the emails. So I think the case that this was a hack by Russia has been undermined. And so then it raises the question of what actually happened. I think it's very plausible it was a leak. I'll just say, though, that to prove that it's a leak, as McGovern and Binney try to do, I think that there's a fair criticism of them, which is that, you know, so their calculation is based on transfer speeds, or partly, right, and the formatting of the file. And they say that the transfer speeds, the formatting of the files, could only have come from a data transfer, a manual, you know, physical data transfer. That's true, but it's possible, if it was hacked, it's possible that the data they're looking at happened after a hack happened. So it's possible that, say, you know, a hacker stole it over the internet and then transferred the data to somewhere else, and that's the information that Binney and McGovern are looking at. Maybe Binney and McGovern have a good rebuttal to that. I asked Binney about that once, and I don't recall him giving an answer that I think, you know, resolved that concern. But in terms of, do I think that they're right that it was a leak? If I had to bet, absolutely, I'd have to bet. I mean, you look at RussiaGate without even knowing any of the details about the email theft. Just given the preponderance of scams with RussiaGate, there was just so much everything was lies, everything. So what are the odds that this Russian hacking thing isn't a scam too, and that it's not part of this effort to basically do exactly as it did, which is, instead of talking about the contents of the emails and the corruption it showed in the Democratic Party and the bias against Bernie Sanders, instead we're talking about how the Russians allegedly stole. That's the interest that this Russian hacking allegation served. It also served to further stigmatize Julian Assange, you know, painting him as this agent of the Russians. So, you know, you look at who it served, this Russian hacking allegation, you see plenty of powerful interests. Then you look at the evidence for it, and it's all been, you know, routinely undermined by the evidence that comes out way after the fact. And I think you have ample grounds to believe that this was not a hack by Russia. But, we'll never, I just can't say anything for sure. I mean, the best thing to do would be for the US to release the underlying intelligence so we could judge for ourselves. Maybe they have something there that we haven't seen that's really convincing. I mean, the problem is secrecy is what keeps this thing sort of up for debate. And the best thing that could be happening is we get all the underlying intelligence so we can decide for ourselves what the evidence is.
So the next patron says, "Hey, Aaron, huge fan. Something I've always been curious about you while following your work. What is your exact political ideology? Obviously, you are on the left, but do you consider yourself more of a populist, a social democrat, or a socialist or Marxist?"
Traditionally, I identify as a socialist, but I also, I don't mind using the term progressive. I just think everybody should have their basic needs taken care of. In terms of exactly what kind of society we want, I don't know. I mean, I just know that this one we're in doesn't work right now, and it's fundamentally unjust. And but it's like it doesn't really honestly cross my mind much, ideology and placing myself within a certain spectrum. I just care about facts. I really just care about, I like journalism a lot. And I see such a huge void to fill because so much journalism is just awful. It's so corrupt. And it's so much of it serves propaganda. I mean, it is propaganda. I mean, look at the topics that I most am immersed in right now: RussiaGate, Syria dirty war, specifically the OPCW scandal. I mean, just think about how much propaganda we get on those things. And I just really enjoy the task of, piercing through that and giving people the truth, because the truth is liberating. The truth can lead to all kinds of positive things. And so and I just take the craft of journalism very seriously. I think it's a good craft. It should exist. I believe in it. And I enjoy doing it. So that's kind of how I fundamentally identify first. And the general principles of the left, people's needs should be met. Systems of power should be challenged, especially coercive systems of power and oppressive systems of power. And, we shouldn't be occupying and sanctioning and bombing foreign countries that we have no business in. I mean, that's my general view.
So this patron asks, besides the RussiaGate media blitz, do you have any opinion that there was some Russian skullduggery and influence with the Trump campaign?
Yes, I do. What is documented is that a Russian troll farm took out some stupid juvenile ads on Facebook and Instagram that nobody saw and weren't even basically about the election. There was I've written about this a lot. The Senate's own study on Russian social media interference found that a less than 10%, I'm being generous, it's probably even less than that, probably less than 5%, a tiny percentage of these Russian ads even mentioned the election. Most of them ran after the election. So unless somehow these ads have a time machine to go back and fool people, then I don't think you can say that these ads impacted a single vote. And it's such a tribute to the power of our propaganda system and of RussiaGate disinformation that people like Hillary Clinton on down were able to get away with going around for 4 years really telling people that Russian social media ads were decisive in convincing people not to vote for her. I mean, she literally said that. She said, the reason blacks, I'm quoting her, blacks didn't vote for me in Michigan because of the Russians. It's the most insane propaganda campaign I can recall. And it's so normalized. And so yes, that's what's documented, is those ads are real. In terms of everything else, collusion is such a profound scam. I've written about this, how you look at, the problem with RussiaGate is there's barely any Russians. There's only a couple of times when the Trump campaign even interacts with anybody actually working on behalf of the Kremlin. There's the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, who Mueller found basically there was no evidence of any impropriety whatsoever. Okay, so ambassadors speaking to politicians and political operatives in the U.S. is very normal. Okay, there's Kislyak, and then there's a spokesperson at for Peskov, who is sorry. And then there's a spokesperson for Putin, this guy named Peskov. And at some point, Michael Cohen called his office and spoke to an assistant because he wanted their help in trying to get Trump Tower Moscow going. But basically, Peskov's office told them it's nothing we can do for you. And they invited them to some general conference for investors in Russia like the following year. So the only actual evidence of like even an interaction between a Trump camp person and a Kremlin official is the Kremlin official telling them, sorry, we can't help you. That's basically the Russians in RussiaGate. And that's why someone like Konstantin Kilimnik, who is a Ukrainian Russian national and an aide to Paul Manafort, that's why at a certain point in the RussiaGate disinformation campaign, he got cast in a starring role. Because at some point they were realizing, I think, they had no Russians. There's no collusion, there's no Russians. So this guy Kilimnik had a Russian passport. And so, perfect, great. We're gonna make him the starring face now. And now all of a sudden, he's a Russian spy who got this sensitive polling data from Paul Manafort, and the Russians use that as part of their sophisticated social media campaign, blasting Buff Bernie memes and masturbation hotline ads at the gullible American public to convince them to vote for Donald Trump. I mean, that's basically the official narrative. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of any actual Russians being in RussiaGate, there's very few of them. But you try to look at reporting, talking about that, it just gets taken for granted that there's all these Russians and Russian operatives, meeting with the Clinton campaign, and everyone kind of just developed their own kind of choose your own adventure. Like everyone's got their own version of what actually happened. It's complete fantasy. If you look at RussiaGate, there are barely any actual Russians. And by the way, the Russians that are there, all of them have deep ties to the West, including Konstantin Kilimnik. He was a State Department informant. And by the way, if you look at the Mueller report, there's a footnote where, they talk about that polling data that he sent to Manafort. The footnote notes that he also sent the same polling data to all these Western officials, US officials. It's in a footnote because he was basically just sharing polling data with people, trying to convince them that like Trump had a shot in the race. And they were talking about, and Kilimnik and Manafort were trying to convince their clients in Ukraine that actually Manafort was valuable because Trump had a shot. And that's why Manafort gave the polling data to Kilimnik. That's what Rick Gates, the key Mueller witness, said. It's reflected in all the emails. The Mueller report even acknowledges that. But again, none of that gets acknowledged because it's not convenient to this RussiaGate fan fiction fantasy.
Well, Aaron, the last patron question is from John McCarthy in Chicago. John writes, Aaron, I would love to see a debate somewhere on independent media between anyone from Gray Zone and Tulsi Gabbard on the question, who has the better strategy for combating terrorism, the Chinese government or the US military? Do you think you could make that happen?
No, because I don't quite accept the premise of the question. I don't want to advocate for a government's terrorism strategy. Whether it's China or the US, I'm concerned about my own government's terrorism and stopping that. And so, unfortunately, I don't think it's the right way to approach things. I get the point of the question. He's trying to say, I think, that what China has done pales in comparison to what the US has done when it comes to addressing its extremism issue. And I would agree with that. I think, again, without having been to Xinjiang, I don't want to weigh in completely conclusively because it's like there might be something I'm missing. But from the evidence I've seen so far, I mean, the US, it's not even a question who has been more destructive and oppressive and murderous. The US has, and it's not even close. I mean, think of how many people have lost their lives since 9/11 due to US wars and sanctions. So yeah, that's not even close. But I have to say on Tulsi, I've been disappointed recently by the things that she's been saying. I defended her when she was being so maliciously smeared, and I don't apologize for defending her because she was being smeared. But she has been saying some stuff that sounds very right-wing to me, and that's been a critique of her going for a long time. And I think the people who've been pointing that out are, saw something that I might have missed because I was so determined to defend her from the attacks, because the attacks were ridiculous. And why was she attacked? She was attacked for, splitting from the Democratic Party leadership, endorsing Bernie Sanders. And then she was attacked for challenging the Syria dirty war, and that deserved to be defended. And I have to wonder, by the way, also, whether things would be any different for her now if she hadn't been completely attacked and smeared by the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, whether she'd now be embracing or welcoming sort of right-wing talking points and right-wing support. I mean, that might sound like an out in a way that
like she got pushed out of the party, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, she got put, and maybe this is who she is all along. And some people have believed that from the start, that she's always been right-wing. And, you know, they, to their credit, her comments of late, I think, do lend credibility to that critique that people have had, that she's always been right-wing. But I was concerned with defending her from the smears, being called the Russian agent, and the crazy campaign she got for really challenging the Syria dirty war. And, you know, as much as I disagree with what she says now, as much as I oppose it, on things like immigration, I give her credit for being brave back then in breaking with the Democratic Party leadership, endorsing Bernie, and challenging the dirty war. I think what she did there took a lot of courage. And I think that can still be acknowledged while not apologizing for what she's doing now.
Well, Aaron, I really do appreciate you being back on the show today and going over all these different questions. For folks out there who would like to follow you and stay up to date with you, how can they do that?
thegrayzone.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Aaron. Again, I really do appreciate you being on the show. It's always an honor to speak with you, and hopefully I can have you back at some point in the future.
I appreciate it. Thank you.